The first sign that something was wrong appeared subtle, almost easy to dismiss. A single package failed to arrive one sunny afternoon. The tracking number confidently declared it had been delivered to the porch, yet the small box was nowhere to be found. At first, it seemed like a shipping error. Perhaps the driver had left it at the wrong house, or maybe a neighbor accidentally picked it up. Life in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac rarely offered anything more scandalous than an overgrown lawn or a misdelivered letter. But this was only the beginning. Days later, another package vanished. Then another. At first, the missing items were trivial. A phone charger, some kitchen utensils, a few household goods ordered online out of convenience. But as the list grew longer, frustration turned to suspicion. Every delivery left on the porch seemed to vanish within hours. The front door camera, an older model with a narrow field of view, revealed nothing helpful. It captured the delivery driver dropping off the box, and then nothing more. Whoever was taking these packages was careful, calculating, and likely someone familiar with the neighborhood's rhythm. The cul-de-sac itself seemed peaceful. Each home stood in a neat row of well-manicured lawns, blooming flower beds, and identical mailboxes. Families waved politely as they passed by. Sprinklers clicked in sync during the hot afternoons, and neighbors gathered for weekend barbecues. It was the kind of place where everyone assumed they knew each other, where suspicion felt almost rude. Yet something about the disappearances didn't sit right. The timing of the thefts began to form a pattern. Deliveries that arrived in the late morning were gone by early afternoon, often within an hour of being dropped off. Whoever was responsible wasn't randomly wandering the streets, hoping for an opportunity. They were watching closely, waiting for the exact moment to strike. The thought sent an uneasy ripple through what had once been a sense of suburban safety. Neighbors began to talk in hushed tones. Perhaps porch pirates were driving through the neighborhood. Maybe a stranger was slipping between houses unnoticed. But there were no unfamiliar cars idling at the curb, no footprints in the neatly swept driveways, no broken doorbells from rushed thefts. If anything, the calm of the neighborhood made the mystery feel even more unsettling. The thief was blending in perfectly, hidden in plain sight. Determined to solve the problem, the homeowner took the first step, installing a new security system. This time, the cameras were high-definition, motion-activated, and connected to a phone for instant alerts. Every angle of the front yard, porch, and driveway was covered. The installation brought a brief wave of relief. Surely, if the thief struck again, they would be caught on camera and confronted immediately. Yet, as if sensing the change, the packages stopped disappearing, at least temporarily. For over a week, every delivery sat untouched, giving a false sense of victory. But complacency is dangerous, and just when it seemed safe to relax, the thief returned. It started with a small envelope left on the porch one morning. Less than 30 minutes later, it was gone. The motion detector triggered, sending a notification to the phone, but when the footage was reviewed, there was no sign of anyone approaching. The package simply vanished off-screen. Frustrated and confused, the homeowner adjusted the angles of the cameras, convinced it must have been a blind spot. The very next day, a larger box was delivered. This time, the homeowner waited inside, determined to catch whoever was behind this. Hours passed with no sign of activity, until finally a shadow moved just out of frame, a brief blur on the edge of the camera's vision, quick and almost deliberate. When the door was opened moments later, the package was already gone. It was as if the thief knew exactly where the cameras couldn't see. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. Concerned neighbors checked their own porches, worried that they too might have been victims without realizing it. Some even offered to keep watch, but no one ever spotted a suspicious vehicle or an unknown figure. Whoever was responsible wasn't coming from outside. The conclusion was as startling as it was disturbing. The thief had to be someone who lived among them. In a community where trust had always been a given, the idea of a neighbor stealing from another neighbor felt almost unthinkable. But the evidence kept building, and suspicion was no longer just a whisper. One face began to appear in everyone's mind, the face of someone who seemed to have far too much interest in everyone else's business. The neighbor who always knew when packages arrived, who always seemed to be looking out a window when the delivery truck came by, who frequently had complaints about the way others maintained their property. Karen. Karen had lived on the street for years, and in that time she'd become infamous for her meddling. She left passive-aggressive notes about trash cans, argued with the HOA about lawn heights, and criticized porch decor for being tacky. She seemed to thrive on conflict, and although most neighbors tried to stay cordial, many avoided her altogether. Still, stealing packages was a different level entirely. Could she really be the culprit? Or was her reputation simply making her an easy target for suspicion? The homeowner knew accusations couldn't be made without proof. This wasn't just about missing deliveries anymore, it was about trust, about principle, about standing up for what was right. If someone in the neighborhood was stealing, there needed to be undeniable evidence. The new plan was simple if risky. Set a trap. A decoy package would be left out in plain sight, carefully marked and containing nothing valuable. The cameras would be adjusted again, this time to cover every possible blind spot. If the thief dared to strike again, they would have nowhere to hide. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the quiet cul-de-sac prepared for another peaceful night, the trap was set. A single cardboard box sat innocently on the porch, waiting like bait in the open. Inside, a small GPS tracker and a harmless note promised to reveal its fate. All that remained was to wait, to watch, and to hope that the thief's greed would finally expose them. And somewhere down the street, behind closed curtains, someone else was watching too, unaware that the game they'd been playing in secret was about to come to a very public end. The decoy package sat on the porch like a silent sentinel, unassuming and ordinary, yet holding the key to solving the mystery. Inside the plain cardboard box lay nothing more than packing material and a discreet GPS tracker, a tiny device that would record every move once the package was lifted from its place. The homeowner, now determined to catch the thief red-handed, monitored the cameras and notifications with unwavering vigilance. The morning passed uneventfully. Delivery trucks rolled through the cul-de-sac, dropping off envelopes and parcels at nearby houses, their engines humming softly as they disappeared down the street. Joggers passed by, dog walkers waved politely, and the quiet rhythm of suburban life continued undisturbed. But the bait remained untouched. By mid-afternoon, the sun cast long shadows across the neatly kept lawns, and the heat sent most neighbors indoors. The perfect opportunity had arrived for anyone bold enough to strike unseen. The motion sensor blinked once, then again, sending a notification straight to the phone. On the screen, the porch came alive with movement. At first, nothing seemed unusual, just the flicker of a figure stepping into frame. But as the recording played, the shape became unmistakable. It was not a stranger. It was someone who belonged here, someone whose face was all too familiar. A figure dressed casually, moving quickly yet deliberately, glancing left and right to ensure no one was watching. The box was snatched up with practiced ease, tucked under one arm, and carried swiftly out of sight. The cameras had done their job. The footage was clear, irrefutable, and damning. The thief wasn't an outsider prowling through the neighborhood. It was Karen. The realization hit with a mix of anger and grim satisfaction. After all the speculation, the late-night worries, and the quiet resentment brewing among neighbors, the truth was undeniable. Karen, the self-appointed watchwoman of the street, the neighbor who prided herself on knowing everyone's business, was stealing packages right off porches. And now there was proof. The GPS tracker activated as soon as the package moved, sending its location in real time. It traveled no farther than a few houses down, stopping squarely at Karen's address. There was no room for excuses, no possibility of misunderstanding. The evidence was complete. A video of the theft, combined with the data pinpointing where the stolen box had ended up. But catching Karen was only part of the plan. Confrontation had to be handled carefully. Accusing her privately would only lead to denial, excuses, or perhaps a dramatic scene no one wanted to deal with alone. The goal was to make sure there could be no argument, no twisting of the facts. The theft had to be exposed publicly, leaving Karen no chance to shift blame. The homeowner quietly shared the footage with a few trusted neighbors, showing them the indisputable proof. Shock rippled through the cul-de-sac. Some weren't surprised. Karen's reputation for pettiness and nosiness had made her a prime suspect. But others were stunned that she would go so far as to steal from the very people she constantly criticized. The anger was palpable, not just for the theft itself, but for the betrayal of trust. This was no anonymous porch pirate passing through. This was one of their own. Someone who lived among them, pretending to uphold neighborhood standards while secretly breaking them. The HOA meeting scheduled for the end of the week provided the perfect opportunity. It was a gathering Karen never missed, often using it as a stage to complain about lawn care violations, unsightly decorations, or parked cars that offended her sense of order. The plan was simple. Reveal the footage to everyone at once, letting the truth speak louder than any accusation. The entire neighborhood would see the theft with their own eyes. In the meantime, the homeowner kept quiet, even as Karen went about her usual routine, waving from her driveway and pretending everything was normal. She had no idea that her secret had been uncovered, that every step she'd taken to avoid detection had been for nothing. She carried herself with the same air of superiority as always, blissfully unaware that her carefully crafted image was about to crumble. When the HOA meeting finally arrived, the tension was electric. Neighbors filled the small community room, chatting in low voices as they took their seats. Karen, as expected, sat front and center, ready to bring up a list of complaints she'd prepared about minor rule infractions. She had no idea that today's meeting wouldn't go as planned. As the projector screen flickered to life, the room quieted. The footage played, showing the porch, the package, and then Karen herself swooping in to take what didn't belong to her. Gasps echoed through the room, followed by murmurs of disbelief and outrage. No one could deny what they were seeing. There was Karen, caught in crystal-clear detail, stealing from her own neighbor. Karen's expression shifted from smug confidence to shock, then to anger, and finally to something that looked almost like fear. The evidence was irrefutable. The HOA president, clearly displeased, announced that this behavior would not be tolerated. The homeowners would be contacting the authorities, and Karen would have to return every stolen item immediately or face legal consequences. The public humiliation was swift and complete. Neighbors stared at Karen with open disgust, whispering to one another as she tried to sputter excuses. Her reputation, already shaky, was now in ruins. No one would look at her the same way again. But for the homeowner, this was only part of the victory. The stolen package still sat at Karen's house, its GPS signal unchanging. Recovering it would provide even more concrete proof of her actions. And if Karen thought she could escape accountability with a few half-hearted apologies, she was gravely mistaken. As the meeting ended in awkward silence, Karen hurried out, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The trap had worked perfectly, but the fallout was just beginning. Trust was shattered, anger simmered among the neighbors, and Karen's once comfortable place in the community had turned into a spotlight she couldn't escape. And the homeowner, holding both the video footage and the GPS data, knew the story wasn't over. The HOA meeting had ended in stunned silence, leaving behind a wave of tension that rolled through the neighborhood like an approaching storm. Word of Karen's theft spread faster than anyone expected. By nightfall, every household on the cul-de-sac knew what had happened, and most were furious. Some were angry because of the theft itself, others because of the betrayal of trust, and a few because they realized packages of their own had gone missing over the past months. Karen, however, seemed determined to pretend nothing was wrong. The very next morning, she appeared outside as though nothing had happened, watering her flowers and waving half-heartedly at passing cars. But her usual smug confidence was gone. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and she avoided eye contact with anyone lingering too long. The stares she received were unmistakable. The neighborhood, once a place where she strutted like a self-appointed enforcer, had turned its collective back on her. The homeowner knew this couldn't simply end with public embarrassment at an HOA meeting. There needed to be accountability. The decoy package had been stolen, its GPS signal still pinging from inside Karen's house, proving beyond any doubt that she hadn't even bothered to dispose of it. And if that box was still there, there was a good chance other stolen packages were too. Determined to confront her directly, the homeowner prepared carefully. This wouldn't be a shouting match on the driveway or an exchange of angry words through a closed door. This would be calm, methodical, and documented. The video footage, the GPS tracker data, and even a printed list of missing items were ready to be presented if Karen tried to deny everything. The goal wasn't just to recover the stolen property. It was to make sure Karen couldn't weasel her way out with excuses. The walk up to Karen's door felt strangely heavy, like approaching the scene of a crime. The house looked as pristine as ever, with perfectly trimmed hedges and a freshly swept porch. But now it felt tainted, as though the immaculate exterior was hiding something rotten. A motion light clicked on, and moments later, the door opened. Karen stood there, feigning surprise, though her forced smile couldn't hide the tension in her eyes. The confrontation was simple, one-sided, and direct. Karen was presented with the evidence. First, the high-definition video of her walking onto the porch and taking the package, then the GPS data showing its current location inside her home. Any pretense she might have had crumbled instantly. Her face flushed with anger and panic, but she tried to talk her way out, claiming misunderstandings, blaming delivery errors, even suggesting someone else might have left the package there. None of it worked. The homeowner refused to leave without the box. Faced with undeniable proof, Karen had no choice but to retrieve it. She disappeared inside for several tense minutes, the silence broken only by the distant sound of drawers opening and closing. When she returned, she held not just the decoy package but several others. Boxes and envelopes that clearly belonged to different neighbors. Some were unopened, still sealed from their original deliveries. Others had been torn apart, the contents missing or scattered. The sight of the stolen packages was infuriating. It wasn't a single impulsive theft. This was a pattern, an ongoing scheme. Karen had been taking deliveries for weeks, maybe months, without any intention of returning them. The packages were collected and documented, each one identified by name and address, so they could be returned to their rightful owners. Pictures were taken of everything to ensure no one could claim the evidence was fabricated. Karen, cornered and humiliated, muttered bitterly but didn't resist further. She clearly understood the gravity of the situation. But the confrontation didn't end there. The homeowner made it clear that this would not simply be swept under the rug with an apology. The HOA had been notified, and law enforcement would be involved if necessary. Karen would have to face the consequences, not just socially, but legally if she refused to cooperate. The walk back home, arms full of stolen goods, felt surreal. The neighbors who peeked through their curtains or stood quietly on their porches knew exactly what had just happened. Whispers followed every step. Some gave nods of approval, silently praising the courage to confront Karen directly. Others simply shook their heads in disbelief that someone living among them would stoop so low. By evening, every recovered package was returned to its rightful owner. Neighbors gathered in driveways, talking animatedly about the confrontation, watching Karen's house with open suspicion. The street that once felt friendly and safe now pulsed with unease, but also a sense of unity. The thefts had drawn everyone together against a common enemy, and that enemy was no longer hidden. Karen, for her part, retreated indoors. Her blinds stayed tightly closed. Her car didn't leave the driveway. The once loud voice of the neighborhood, always ready to lecture others about rules and appearances, had gone completely silent. But the damage was already done. Her reputation was ruined, and her isolation was obvious to everyone. Still, the homeowner knew Karen's personality. Humiliation alone wouldn't stop her from lashing out. Someone as prideful and petty as Karen wouldn't simply fade quietly into the background. She would either try to salvage her image with excuses or turn her anger toward retaliation. And if she chose the latter, things could get ugly. The plan now was to stay one step ahead. Every camera remained active, every notification closely monitored. The HOA prepared a formal notice, citing the thefts as a violation of community rules and warning Karen that further action would be taken if she continued her behavior. The neighbors were also on high alert, ready to report anything suspicious. The sense of victory after catching her red-handed was tempered by caution. This wasn't over yet. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. And while she might have been forced to return the stolen packages, the look in her eyes during the confrontation had said everything. She was angry, she was embarrassed, and she wasn't done. In the days following the confrontation, the neighborhood remained on edge. The stolen packages had been returned, the evidence documented, and Karen's once commanding presence had evaporated into silence. Yet silence from Karen was never a good sign. For years, she had thrived on control, injecting herself into every conversation, meddling in every decision, and monitoring every small detail of the cul-de-sac as though it were her personal kingdom. Being exposed had wounded her pride in a way she couldn't ignore. At first, there were small, almost unnoticeable changes. The lights inside Karen's house stayed on late into the night, glowing behind tightly drawn curtains. Her car shifted positions in the driveway, as if she was watching the street from different angles. And though she no longer waved at passing neighbors, she was often seen standing at her window, watching. Then the retaliation began, subtle at first, but unmistakable to anyone paying attention. One morning, trash mysteriously appeared scattered across the homeowner's front lawn. A few days later, the sprinkler system was found tampered with, left running through the night until water pooled across the driveway. It was all small enough to dismiss as coincidence, but the timing and precision spoke volumes. Karen was angry, and she wasn't afraid to show it in ways that didn't leave direct evidence. Other neighbors noticed similar things. One family found deep scratches on their mailbox. Another discovered tire tracks across their flower bed. These weren't random acts of vandalism. They were targeted strikes meant to intimidate, to remind everyone that Karen wasn't going down without a fight. The homeowner knew better than to confront her directly this time. Karen thrived on conflict, twisting any accusation into a personal attack she could use to play the victim. Instead, the decision was made to outsmart her again. Cameras were repositioned to cover every inch of the property. Front, back, and sides. Motion sensors were recalibrated. Even small, hidden devices were placed near the driveway and mailbox, ready to capture any suspicious movement. For several days, nothing happened. Then, just past midnight, the cameras caught her. Karen crept across the lawn, her figure barely illuminated by the dim glow of streetlights. She carried something in her hands, crouching low as she moved, pausing to glance over her shoulder. The footage showed her carefully placing what appeared to be raw eggs along the edge of the porch, likely intending them to be crushed underfoot in the morning. But this time, there would be no mystery about who was responsible. The evidence was undeniable, but the homeowner waited before acting. It was clear Karen was escalating, her petty vengeance becoming bolder each night. Rather than confronting her after a single act, the goal was to build an irrefutable record, a clear pattern of harassment that could not be explained away. And as the days passed, Karen delivered exactly that. She moved garbage cans into the driveway to block the car from leaving. She scattered birdseed in the yard to attract pests. On one occasion, she even left a handwritten note on the porch, though the cameras captured her doing it, and the message only further incriminated her. What Karen didn't realize was that every action, every movement, every second she spent skulking around the neighborhood was being recorded from multiple angles. The neighbors who had once tolerated her antics now grew openly hostile. People whispered on sidewalks and exchanged knowing looks when Karen passed by. Parents warned their children not to go near her yard. She was no longer the self-appointed guardian of neighborhood standards. She had become the villain everyone wanted gone. When the HOA called an emergency meeting to discuss the escalating incidents, the homeowner arrived prepared. This time, it wasn't just about stolen packages. The video footage of Karen's late-night prowling, the photos of damaged property, and even the GPS tracker logs were all presented in sequence. The room, packed with neighbors, watched in stunned silence as Karen's retaliation was laid bare for all to see. Her face turned red. Her voice trembled with outrage as she tried to shout down the evidence, claiming she was being framed, insisting that everyone was conspiring against her. But her words rang hollow. The proof was too overwhelming, too detailed, too consistent. Even her closest acquaintances, the few who once humored her endless complaints, couldn't defend her now. The HOA voted unanimously to take action. Karen would be fined for her behavior, and if the harassment continued, law enforcement would be involved. More importantly, the neighborhood formally agreed to band together. No one would tolerate her intimidation tactics anymore. After the meeting, Karen stormed out of the room, her expression a mixture of rage and fear. The thin veneer of control she'd always maintained had completely shattered. No longer able to manipulate or intimidate in the shadows, she found herself exposed, cornered, and despised by the very community she had tried to dominate. But even as the homeowner walked back home, there was no sense of victory, only unease. Karen had been caught twice now, and each time, she'd responded with more hostility. Someone like her, someone who thrived on attention and power, wouldn't stop just because she'd been humiliated in front of her neighbors. If anything, she would become more desperate, more reckless. That night, the house was locked tight, the cameras live-streaming every angle to a phone resting on the nightstand. Outside, the cul-de-sac lay quiet under the glow of streetlights. But behind the curtains of one particular house, a plan was forming. One that would take this neighborhood drama to an entirely new level. Karen wasn't finished, and the next move she made would push things to the breaking point. The days after the emergency HOA meeting were heavy with unease. The neighborhood had rallied together, united against Karen's petty vandalism and late-night sabotage, but the tension never truly faded. Everyone knew Karen well enough to understand that embarrassment alone would not stop her. She had been cornered, exposed twice, and the look in her eyes as she left the meeting wasn't remorse. It was pure defiance. The homeowner doubled down on precautions. Every camera remained active 24 hours a day, floodlights were programmed to activate at the slightest motion, and a few hidden recorders captured angles that even the main security system might miss. The driveway, the porch, even the mailbox were under constant surveillance. It wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. For several days, Karen remained quiet. Her blinds stayed closed, her car barely moved, and her once frequent patrols around the neighborhood stopped altogether. The silence might have been mistaken for surrender, but there was something too deliberate about it. Karen wasn't retreating. She was planning. The first sign came late one evening. A motion alert chimed on the homeowner's phone, and the live feed showed someone lingering at the edge of the property. It wasn't Karen herself, at least not visibly. The figure kept to the shadows, wearing a hooded jacket, moving carefully along the boundary of the yard. Nothing was touched, nothing was stolen, but the message was clear. Karen had found a way to send someone else to do her dirty work. The next morning, the mailbox was open, its contents scattered across the street. A delivery scheduled for the afternoon never arrived, later revealed to have been canceled by someone posing as the homeowner. These small acts weren't damaging enough to involve the police directly, but they added up, creating a sense of constant pressure. It felt like living under siege in the very place that was supposed to be safest. The neighbors grew restless. Everyone watched Karen's house more closely now, but she barely emerged, and when she did, it was with her usual air of superiority. No one dared confront her directly, not after seeing how she lashed out when caught. Still, the whispers grew louder. Parents walked their children past quickly. Groups gathered at driveways to talk about what might happen next. It wasn't just one homeowner she had alienated anymore. It was the entire cul-de-sac. The breaking point came one stormy night. The rain fell in sheets, drumming against rooftops, and the streets were empty under the glow of flickering streetlights. Around midnight, the cameras picked up motion again, this time closer, bolder. The grainy figure wasn't content to linger at the edges of the property. Someone was at the front door, crouching low, fiddling with something near the lock. A gloved hand reached out, tugging at the handle, testing it, and then moving toward the nearby windows. Every second was recorded in crisp, high-definition clarity. The face obscured by the hood was hard to see, but the body language was unmistakable. Deliberate, aggressive, and completely unafraid of being caught. Then, for a single brief moment, the hood slipped as the figure glanced toward the streetlight. The cameras froze the image instantly. Karen. She wasn't sending someone else after all. She had come herself. The homeowner, awake and watching from inside, triggered the exterior floodlights. The sudden blaze of white light illuminated the porch like a stage, catching Karen in the act. She froze, stunned, then bolted down the driveway and across her own lawn, vanishing into the night. But it was too late. Every second of her attempted break-in was captured from multiple angles. There would be no excuses this time, no twisting of the story to make herself the victim. By morning, the evidence was compiled. The footage showed Karen clearly, first creeping onto the property, then trying the door, then running when the lights exposed her. Neighbors who had doubted how far she would go now had proof she was willing to escalate from petty theft and vandalism to something far more serious. The HOA president was notified immediately, and law enforcement was called. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. This was criminal trespassing with clear intent. Officers visited Karen's house later that day, questioning her about the incident. She denied everything, of course, claiming the footage was fabricated, that she had been home all night, that everyone in the neighborhood was conspiring against her. But denial didn't matter, the images didn't lie. When the officers left her property, the entire street watched from behind curtains and half-open doors. Karen stood in her driveway, shouting at no one in particular, her words lost in the wind, her face twisted with fury. Her composure was gone. She was no longer the self-appointed enforcer of neighborhood standards. She was a neighbor publicly unraveling under the weight of her own actions. The HOA scheduled another meeting, this time with a clear agenda: removing Karen from any community authority, imposing maximum fines, and supporting law enforcement in whatever steps they needed to take. The homeowner prepared to present the footage in front of everyone once again, determined that this would be the last time Karen could terrorize the street. But even as the preparations were made, an uneasy question lingered in everyone's mind. Karen had already been humiliated twice. She had retaliated with vandalism and now attempted something far more serious. What would she do when she realized there was no way out, no more excuses left to make? The storm that had drenched the neighborhood the night before seemed to linger in the air, heavy and oppressive. The tension was building toward something final, something explosive. The next HOA meeting would decide more than just Karen's future in the community. It would determine whether the neighborhood could ever feel safe again. And somewhere behind those tightly closed curtains, Karen was watching, waiting, and planning her next move. The fallout from the HOA meeting carried through the neighborhood like an echo that refused to fade. By the next morning, everyone had heard about Karen's exposure. Whispers trailed through the streets, behind curtained windows and across manicured lawns. The neighborhood Facebook group buzzed with posts, some condemning her behavior, others demanding the HOA take formal action. Karen, once notorious for nitpicking minor rule violations, had suddenly become the very example of what the community claimed to stand against. In the days that followed, Karen's perfectly planned routine began to unravel. The porch that once gleamed with flower arrangements now sat bare, devoid of decoration. No one waved to her as she drove past. Some even turned away deliberately, pretending not to see her car creeping by. Her complaints, once eagerly acknowledged by the HOA, now went unanswered. She was no longer the queen bee of neighborhood order, but an outcast whose petty theft had destroyed her carefully constructed image. The narrator, meanwhile, found themselves at the center of unwanted attention. Neighbors who had once kept a polite distance now stopped by to offer apologies, excuses, or simply to gossip. Many confessed they'd also had packages mysteriously disappear, which only deepened the community's resentment toward Karen. The HOA president sent an email promising swift disciplinary action, though whether it was to save face or to genuinely enforce the rules remained unclear. A formal meeting was scheduled to address unethical resident conduct. Though it wasn't stated outright, everyone knew it was about Karen. On the night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed tighter than ever before. Tension buzzed in the air like static before a storm. Karen arrived late, her usual confident stride replaced by stiff, defensive movements. She avoided eye contact with everyone, but the murmurs followed her like shadows. The HOA board read aloud their findings. Karen had been caught red-handed on camera, and multiple neighbors came forward to confirm missing packages from their own homes. The evidence was undeniable. The board imposed a fine, revoked her voting privileges in HOA decisions for a year, and required her to return or reimburse all stolen items. Though no criminal charges were filed, the social consequences were punishment enough. She was humiliated not just privately, but publicly, and in a neighborhood where reputation mattered more than anything, that was devastating. Karen's reaction was a mix of indignation and poorly concealed guilt. She tried to deflect blame, claiming porch piracy was rampant and she'd merely been holding items for safekeeping. But no one believed her. The HOA president shut down her excuses, and the neighbors' silence, cold and unyielding, was louder than any argument. In the aftermath, Karen withdrew almost completely. Her once frequent HOA patrols stopped. Her front yard, once obsessively maintained, grew unkempt. She was rarely seen outside, except for quick trips to her car. The narrator noticed that packages no longer went missing. Delivery trucks came and went without incident, and porch cameras across the neighborhood captured only what they were meant to: safe, uneventful deliveries. The neighborhood itself seemed to exhale in relief. Conversations shifted from whispered anger to a cautious sense of unity. Neighbors began looking out for one another, not through HOA rules and fines, but through genuine concern. The incident had exposed not just Karen's behavior, but the cracks in the community's values. How easily fear and power could corrupt even the most ordinary of streets. As for the narrator, the experience was bittersweet. They had caught the thief, but at the cost of weeks of stress, surveillance, and confrontation. It was satisfying to see justice done, but also unsettling to realize how far things had escalated over something as simple as stolen packages. The camera that had once been installed out of necessity now served as a quiet reminder. Trust was fragile, and once broken, it left a scar. In time, the neighborhood returned to a semblance of normalcy. New families moved in, lawns bloomed in the spring, and the HOA meetings grew dull again. But Karen's house, that pristine corner lot, remained a symbol of how quickly appearances could shatter. Whether she learned a lesson or simply nursed her resentment in silence, no one could say. What was certain, however, was that the neighborhood would never see her the same way again. And every time the narrator opened their door to retrieve a package, they felt a small, private victory. A quiet assurance that they had stood their ground, defended their home, and reminded the neighborhood that no one, not even Karen, was above accountability. The story of the missing deliveries became a cautionary tale whispered to new residents, a reminder that sometimes the biggest threats to a peaceful street aren't outsiders at all, but the people living right next door. 3.